George Callahan's rig roared through the Missouri night, the highway his only home. But when he stood up for a bullied kid, a secret unraveled, pulling him into a life he never saw coming. The highway stretched out like a ribbon under the Missouri night sky. George Callahan, known to the CB radio crowd as Eastwood, gripped the wheel of his 18-wheeler, the rumble of the diesel engine, a steady companion. The dashboard glowed faintly, casting shadows across his weathered face. 55 years old, with hands calloused from decades of hauling freight, George measured his life in miles, not minutes. The road was his world: truck stops, greasy diner food, and the hum of tires on asphalt. But tonight, something felt off. Maybe it was the ache in his back, or the weight of the hospital bills piling up for his wife Mary. Maybe it was the creeping sense that this life, the only one he'd ever known, wasn't enough anymore. He flicked on the CB radio static, crackling, before voices broke through. "Got any good buddies out there on this fine stretch of asphalt?" A voice called young and cocky. George hesitated, then keyed the mic. "Eastwood here. Fine enough, I reckon." The chatter picked up complaints about traffic boasts, about speed, the usual road talk. Then, a younger voice cut in sharp with a laugh. "Hey, Pops, check out this sweet shortcut I found. Bet that old rig of yours can't keep up." George's jaw tightened. It wasn't just the reckless bragging, it was the pops that stung, like he was some relic who didn't belong. He keyed the mic again, voice low and sharp. "Back in my day, we respected the road and our machines. Shortcuts lead to breakdowns, and breakdowns lead to missed deliveries and hungry mouths to feed." A snicker came through the speaker. "Relax, old-timer. These new rigs can handle anything. Ain't got time for that old-school caution." George's knuckles whitened on the wheel. He pictured the kid behind the voice, probably more focused on his phone than his gauges, treating his truck like a toy instead of a lifeline. Someday, he growled, that carelessness'll catch up with you, and those fancy machines won't save you from a busted axle or a blown tire. Silence hung heavy for a moment. Then an older voice tinged with humor chimed in. "He ain't wrong, kiddos. Some lessons you only learn the hard way." George didn't smile, but he felt a flicker of relief. Not everyone had forgotten the old ways. The next morning, George pulled into the yard of Ridgeway Trucking, a dusty lot in a small Missouri town. His rig groaned as he parked, the familiar smell of diesel and rubber filling the air. He spotted a new kid, Jack, struggling under a stack of tires. Sweat soaked the kid's faded Metallica shirt, but his jaw was set stubborn as hell. George knew that look. It was the same one he'd had 30 years ago, back when pride meant more than a paycheck. Jack's old beater car sat off to the side, a rust bucket that stuck out among the shiny new rigs. Then came the roar of another truck pulling in. Bulldozer Barnes and his crew, all flash, and no substance, rolled up with loud music and designer sunglasses. They strutted like they owned the place, tossing insults at Jack. "Look at this guy," Bulldozer laughed, pointing at Jack's sweat-stained shirt. "What's that car, kid?" "A junkyard special." The others snickered, but Jack kept his head down, wrestling with the tires. George scowled from his cab. He knew guys like Bulldozer big talk, bigger egos treating their rigs like toys. He wanted to stay out of it, but the kid's stubborn grit reminded him of himself. And then there was Mary. Her voice on the phone last night had been weaker, the hospital bills heavier. He couldn't shake the worry. Things came to a head that afternoon. Jack was stuck with a flat tire, Bulldozer smirking as he leaned against his rig. "Fix it, kid," he taunted. "Ain't nobody here to hold your hand." The other drivers looked away, chuckling. George's gut churned. He wasn't one for meddling, but this was too much. He climbed out of his cab boots, crunching on gravel, and strode over. "Move," he said gruffly to Bulldozer, who raised an eyebrow but stepped back. George knelt beside Jack, his hands moving with the ease of years on the job. "Watch close, kid," he said. "Lug nuts gotta be tight, but not so tight you strip 'em." Jack nodded, eyes wide, soaking up every word. George showed him the tricks, how to angle the wrench, how to check the tread. It wasn't just about the tire. It was about respect for the work. When they finished, Jack muttered, "Thanks, man." George just nodded and headed back to his rig. He didn't see the pair of eyes watching from the dusty office window. William Ridgway, the owner of the company, stood there, his sharp gaze fixed on the scene. He wasn't what George expected from a big-shot businessman. Sure, the suit was crisp, but there was something else, a hint of grit, like he'd known hard work once. William saw something in George that day, something rare in the grime of the truck yard decency. That evening, George sat in his cab, the CB quiet for once. He dialed Mary, her voice crackling through the phone. "You holding up, sweetheart?" he asked. "I'm fine, George," she said, but he could hear the strain. "The doctors say it's manageable, but the bills." She trailed off. George's chest tightened. "I'll figure it out." He said more to himself than her. When he hung up, he stared at the dashboard, the weight of it all pressing down. Retirement was looming, but what did that even mean? More time to worry, maybe. More time to miss the road, the only life he'd ever known. The next day, a summons came. George found himself in William Ridgway's office, his work boots scuffing the plush carpet. The polished desk felt like a mile wide, and William, sitting behind it, looked out of place in the truck yard world. "Observed your work ethic." "Eastwood." William said, his voice quiet but firm. "And how you stepped in with that yard hand yesterday." "Admirable." George shifted, uncomfortable with the praise. "Kid just reminded me of myself," he mumbled, staring at his scarred hands. William leaned forward. "Understand you're facing difficulties. Medical bills, that sort of thing. I want to offer some assistance." George's pride flared. Years on the road had taught him to rely on no one. "Appreciate it," he grunted. "But I'll manage." William's lips twitched almost a smile. "Not charity, George. An investment. I see potential wasted here." He gestured toward the window where the truck yard buzzed with activity. "Heard you're nearing retirement. Offer's simple. I'll cover Mary's medical expenses, let you ease off the road gradually. In return, I want your expertise elsewhere." George stared, the words sinking in. An escape from the endless highway, but at what cost? Something niggled at him, a hunch. There was more to William than met the eye. "Don't need an answer now," William said, sensing his hesitation. "The offer stands." The next morning, William called George back. The formality was gone, replaced by a tense energy. "Time to stop dancing around it." William said, his gaze steady. "That yard hand, Jack. He's my son. Sent him here to learn the value of $1 the hard way. You showed him more than I ever could." George's jaw dropped. It all clicked, the way the other drivers took Jack for granted, the way they never missed a chance to remind him he wasn't one of them. William's offer wasn't just about George. It was about teaching his son humility, about bridging a gap George hadn't even seen. Weeks later, the hospital bills were paid. Mary was home, a healthy flush in her cheeks, replacing the worry lines. George stood beside his old rig, no longer his lifeline, but a project. Jack worked beside him, his focus surprising for a kid who'd once seemed all attitude. "So what are we teaching this old beast today?" Jack asked, wiping grease from his hands. George grinned. "Start with the basics, kid, always the basics." Life settled into a new rhythm. Instead of highways, there was the clang of tools and the hum of engines coming back to life. George and Jack worked side by side, the quiet between them comfortable. Evenings were for Mary walks through quiet fields, the chirp of crickets, a welcome change from the roar of his truck. Jack was learning fast, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. "Ever get lonely out there?" he asked one day, wrench in hand. George chuckled, launching into a story. Started with a hitchhiker on a stormy night. He said, a skinny gal in a drenched wedding dress, desperate for a ride. Turns out she'd ditched her wedding, and her groom was hot on her heels. What followed was a wild chase through a podunk town, complete with a shotgun-wielding priest, and me somehow making my delivery on time. Jack snorted, "Come on, Pops, you're pulling my leg. Ain't no priest got a shotgun." The other drivers in the yard didn't know what to make of George. Some were curious. Others, like Bulldozer, were quietly annoyed. But the older guys, the ones who'd been around, gave him nods of respect. They got it. George had earned his place, not with flash, but with sweat. One hot summer day, a sleek black car rolled into the yard. William stepped out, older, but still sharp, a smile crossing his face, when he saw Jack covered in grease and grinning beside George. He knew what was happening without a word. William invited George and Mary to his island villa off the Georgia coast. It was a different world. Endless ocean views, silent staff, a life so far from truck stops and diners, it felt like another planet. Mary took to it swimming in the mornings and wandering the gardens, her laughter brighter than it had been in years. George, though, felt out of place, his boots too rough for the polished floors. He was restless, guilty for being there like he didn't belong. Then the Jeep by the pool wouldn't start. George recognized the engine's cough, and soon he was elbow-deep in grease tools scattered around him. William watched from the house, a small smile on his face. When George got the Jeep running, it felt like he'd fixed a piece of himself too. That evening, William approached the fading sunlight, painting the clifftop gold. "You have a gift, George," he said quietly. "The kind that can't be bought or taught." A pause, then an offer, gentle but firm. "Would you be interested in helping out with the cars, tending to odd jobs around the estate?" Nothing too taxing, just keeping those hands busy. George felt a swell of mixed emotions. It wasn't the life he'd pictured, but it was a chance to feel useful, to hold on to the satisfaction of work. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Back on the mainland, things had changed. Mary's eyes shone with a spark George hadn't seen in years. The yard felt different too. Bulldozer was still his cocky self, but some of the younger drivers were friendlier, tossing George a nod or a quick, "Hey, Eastwood." Word got around about Jack. His yard hand days were over. William was grooming him for the office, preparing him to take over the business someday. But George caught the kid's wistful look when a truck's rumble echoed through the warehouse. He knew that pull, the call of grease and gears that got in your blood. George's days on the island settled into a rhythm. There was always a vintage car needing a tune-up, a pipe to fix the steady hum of work, without the relentless grind he'd known. Evenings brought a new kind of reward, driving the restored Jeep along the coastal road, Mary beside him, the setting sun painting the sky. Sometimes fate and good intentions wove unexpected paths. George knew, as sure as he knew an engine block, that he was right where he meant to be. Hey folks, if you love this story, drop a like and share it with someone who'd get a kick out of it. Let us know how it made you feel with one word in the comments. See you on the next stretch of road.